Hello, guys. If you're joining me now, we're breaking news with what's going on in Ukraine. Russia is hitting the capital city after a plane, Ukrainian plane, of course it's a U.S. plane, but a Ukrainian pilot has been taking out Russian pilots and, of course, hitting people over the Russian border. So a Ukrainian pilot has been attacking. So Russian forces are moving into the capital city of Kiev. As we speak, multiple explosions are being heard. In the capital city, Ukrainian military reporting clashes with Russian forces in Kiev. The U.S. and EU and a number of other countries have announced new sanctions against Russia momentarily. Stuff is happening as we speak there. It is getting quite active quite quickly. I'm going to cut over here and see what's going on with the spokesperson
in Lviv, and that, who have since
State Department.
Relocated basically to Poland, and who would have gone and are now temporarily at least living in Poland.
It was a core embassy team, Matt. That
just Americans, or were there local staff too?
It was a core embassy team. I'm not in a position to offer if there were any locally employed staff with them. Do you mind?
Just to close the loop on sanctions, and then I'll move on to UN very briefly. So the assessments out there about how long it would take Russian forces to overrun Kyiv is mentioned like in days. And yet the president and others in this government said yesterday sanctions would be more impactful in time. Is it fair to say then in the immediate term, U.S. is basically unable to stop Putin?
I don't think you heard anyone say that. What you have heard us say is that, well, let me back up. Over the course of months now, we have been ringing the alarm bell as we had information available to us as early as late last year that Vladimir Putin had these intentions. We started to see his forces mobilize around that time. You remember in November of 2021 when we first started to speak about this publicly. Beyond our public messaging, we engaged in robust private diplomacy behind closed doors to ensure that our allies and partners around the world knew what we knew so that we could operate in tandem with one another. When it comes to the sanctions that you mentioned, these were coordinated with allies and partners around the world. Part of what gives them the heft that they have is that these were not just measures that were introduced by the United States, but also by the European Union.
It doesn't matter how many countries introduce that. It's a matter of time. And we're talking about days, and President openly said that they don't have the days.
But you will look, if you see what has transpired in the Russian marketplace over the course not only of recent days, but of recent weeks. The threat of these massive consequences have pushed the ruble to its lowest levels in years, pushed the Russian stock market, pushed down investor sentiment, and have made clear that these measures have tremendous bite. And we saw that yesterday when these measures were introduced. So what is true is that these measures are designed to garner strength, to garner momentum over time. But with their immediate introduction yesterday, on top of the measures that we imposed on Monday in response to President Putin's recognition of these so-called republics in eastern Ukraine, you have seen that there has been an immediate effect. There has been an immediate bite.
My final one is on UN. The vote is delayed for an hour. Do you know why?
I do not. You would need to
Are you
ask the UN.
confident you've got UAE and India to vote yes?
We are confident that the Russian Federation will be and will be shown to be isolated on the world stage. We are confident that our partners, that our allies around the world will stand in very clear, very stark opposition to this aggression, to this assault on Ukraine's territorial integrity, to its independence, to its sovereignty. We have every expectation that message will emanate loud and clear from this UN session.
All your partners, including India and UAE.
We have every expectation that message will be loud and clear to the Russian Federation, unambiguous to President Putin. Yes.
Can I follow up on something that you said when you were speaking with Matt? You said if you were to listen to the blunder of President Putin, you might believe he was willing to go beyond Ukraine. Do you have reason to believe that that is the case?
President Putin knows, because we have stated very clearly that our commitment to NATO's Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, is as vibrant, is as sacrosanct as it was at NATO's founding some 7 decades ago. You heard the president say again yesterday that we will fight for every inch of NATO territory. That is a message that we have made very clear in public. It is a message that we have conveyed very clearly in private. I have no doubt that message has reached President Putin.
And one separate question. I want to do a follow-up.
And then I'll hand it right back to you. But is there anything specific to indicate? The NATO Secretary General said today that there are indications that the Kremlin's objectives span beyond Ukraine. Is there anything to suggest from the U.S.'s perspective that they do?
Well, what we have seen from President Putin, not only in recent days, but in recent years, is his desire to go back to an era that has long since passed, an era in which spheres of influence are acceptable, an era in which large countries can bully small countries, an era in which might equals right. That is an era that should have ended, certainly with the fall of the Berlin Wall, certainly with the end of the Cold War. But of course, President Putin has other desires, other aspirations. It is our task to reinforce the rules that have, again, governed the international community over the course of some 70 years, but certainly in more recent years since the end of the Cold War. Abigail.
Can you give us any update on your efforts to help Americans who are still in Ukraine? I know you are always hesitant to give exact numbers, but do you have any further indication of how many Americans have crossed over the border into Poland, for instance?
So, as you've heard us say, we don't have precise figures in any country around the world of the number of Americans who are present in a foreign country at any given time. And you know those reasons well. We don't track Americans. We don't require them to register. We don't require them to unregister when they leave a country. In the case of Ukraine, however, we did have an estimate, and we do have an estimate dated from October of last year of Americans resident in Ukraine. At the time, October of 2021, there were 6,600 Americans resident in Ukraine by our estimation. And that estimation was based on data from our Ukrainian partners. It was based on data that was available to us as well, including data from local organizations. That same month, October of 2021, is this very same month that we started warning Americans not to travel to Ukraine. It was those warnings were later superseded by clear and consistent encouragement to Americans to leave the country, and most recently, warnings that Americans should leave the country. So since October of 2021, we have seen a sweeping shift in the advice and guidance we have provided to Americans who either sought to travel to Ukraine or Americans who might have been resident in Ukraine. So while we don't have a firm number of Americans who are there, we have good reason to believe, and I think all of you have good reason to conclude, that the number of Americans in Ukraine now is far lower than 6,600. What we have been doing over the course of weeks now is communicating with Americans who are located in Ukraine, asking them to be in touch with us, providing us their contact information so that we in turn can provide them specific, tailored guidance about what they should do to depart the country. We have done so in the context of commercial air travel when that was available, and now more recently we've provided specific, consistent guidance on how Americans can travel overland to leave the country, including offering them specific advice as to which border crossings to go to so that they can travel from Ukraine into Poland with ease. We've conducted diplomacy with our Polish allies to make sure that Americans need not provide any sort of advance notice when they seek to travel from Ukraine into Poland. We've set up a welcome center on the Polish side of the border with representatives of the State Department there to offer them any advice, any forms, any guidance they may need to complete their onward travel. So we've been in regular, consistent touch with Americans who are in Ukraine and Americans who have made that travel into Poland. Yes, sir.
Ned, if I may, I'd like to follow on sanctions. So you mentioned those additional measures means additional sanctions, but what might be the trigger? What might trigger them? So what else are you waiting from Moscow? Moscow is bombing Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. I have the moral right to tell about this. I'm not speculating because my family spent this night in the
Okay, we don't trust them either.
So what might,
Talk about this in just
what
a
else
minute.
might happen? And just to push administration to apply the additional sanctions. And secondly, if I may, there are a lot of talks in Ukraine about the possibility of some kind of talks with the Russians. President Zelensky told about this in his statement that maybe America and United Kingdom may back in Ukraine in those conversations. So what's your message to Ukraine? Do you think that it's necessary right now or it's the wrong way? Thank you.
Thank you. So we do believe that diplomacy is the only responsible way to address this. That was our belief prior to the start of the Russian invasion. It is our belief now that the Russian invasion and assault on Ukraine has begun. At the same time, we want to see diplomacy conducted in a context and an environment in which it can succeed. Our concern had been prior to the Russian invasion that, again, Moscow was using the so-called pretense of diplomacy, pretending to take part in serious diplomatic discussions, having these staged, highly choreographed meetings of the National Security Council where President Putin would instruct his lieutenants to engage in diplomacy only as he continued to amass his forces. Now we see offers of diplomacy at the barrel of a gun. We see these offers as tanks continue to roll across the border, as your fellow countrymen, your fellow countrywomen remain subject to unimaginable levels of violence and brutality by the Russian Federation. We want to make clear to President Putin that diplomacy by the barrel of a gun, coercive diplomacy, is not something that we are going to take part in. It is not something that will bring an end to this conflict in a real, genuine, and sustainable way. We do want to see diplomacy succeed. That is why we are doing everything we can through our public messaging, but in some ways, much more importantly, through the measures we have introduced over the past couple days, coercive measures that are designed to contour President Putin's next moves, to put pressure on his economy, on his financial system, on those around him, and on President Putin himself, so that we see de-escalation, we see diminution of violence, we see withdrawal of forces. We have not seen any of those things just yet, but these measures were just instituted, and it is our sincere desire to see this going forward so that we can work diplomatically to bring an end to this senseless, unprovoked violence. In terms of sanctions, as we've said, we have instituted the most biting, the most crippling, the most devastating set of sanctions together with our allies and partners that the world has ever seen. and we have additional measures that if we do not see de-escalation, if we do not see a diminution in violence, that we are prepared to enact, again, together with our allies and partners. Yes?
Thank you again to everyone who's watching here with us on live now from Fox. We are live.
This is crazy going on out here. I'm going to talk to you guys for a minute. This is what they're talking about has absolutely nothing to do with actually what's happening right now in Ukraine. Tanks have moved into downtown Kiev. There has been air assaults going on, all because of a pilot, right now a Ukrainian pilot, has been taking out Russian jets using a U.S. fighter jet. One of the fighter jets we donated, or we sold them at a really ridiculous price. We gave them, basically. But that's going to end up biting us in the butt pretty soon here because of this. As we're looking around what's going on around Ukraine, these are live feeds, of course, going around Kiev. Looks pretty quiet out there, but it is martial law. Nobody's allowed on the streets right now. So, of course, martial law is in effect as we're speaking right now. We're staying tuned and we're watching what's happening in Ukraine as we speak. It is going to get worse before it gets better tonight. I'll give you that for sure. Unfortunately, that's what we're stuck with right now. This is not a good time. This is not going to be good for us in the future. The elites are having their fun. They're playing their game. A tank ran over a car. There's been multiple fighter jets shot down on both sides. Nobody's talking about what's happening, though. They're talking about what could happen if it escalates from now. But we are looking at what is actually happening there. And escalation, I feel, will happen quickly, as hackers, of course, from Russia have been taking on many other locations, including France and Germany. So, of course, all it takes is one of those to call an Article 5. As soon as Article 5 is called, the UN is then at war with Russia. At this point, Russia is not happy with the U.S. at all. I have a feeling we will be feeling effects of cyber attacks within the next couple hours. This is just recent that the fighter jet did shoot down 2 Russian pilots. So I have a feeling we will be feeling direct results from that. Russia believes it was us. There are some power outages. Yes, there is some power outages on Kiev. As you can see, the bottom feed right here, right above the clock. It's 10 p.m. There should be a whole bunch of lights on right there, and there are not. Major power outages are happening. If you don't have webcams in Kiev, I am sorry. We will be trying to keep webcams up and live. We'll try to keep them up and live. A lot of webcams are getting kicked out in Kiev, and Putin, of course, already said, Russia already said, Facebook is going to they're cutting all access to Facebook, to internet access. We're lucky enough to have these cameras live out there. We do have a couple more feeds that we can go throughout Kiev. But the regular webcams are offline right now. These are satellite webcams only that are available. Please stay tuned, and we will keep getting you additional cameras as we can. It's gonna get bad. It's gonna get bad. And I don't know how bad it's gonna get here in the U.S., but we will be facing, of course, fuel price going up and everything else. Please support us if you can. All support goes directly towards families in need or truck drivers, of course, in need right now. So, we'll try to keep you guys updated and everything going on. It is not getting better out there.
As you rain down bombs, mortar shells, as your tanks advance.
The State Department's not exactly going to be giving you all the information, but you're going to get most of it.
A capital, as your political leaders make demands of demilitarization, make demands of a fundamentally neutral foreign policy, essentially removing agency. And
please share this feed out, because we are going to try to stay live with this Ukraine thing now throughout the early morning hours. Usually we see attacks first thing in the morning.
We see eye to eye.
So we will be staying live, trying to cover this. I may not be talking the whole time, but
earlier today. Secretary Blinken, as you know, spoke to Foreign Minister Kuleba earlier today. We will continue to provide guidance, to share information with our Ukrainian partners. They, in turn, are
The webcam that was actually on the side where the tanks are has been down already. They already shot it down.
Will be fully coordinated.
Rodney, if I had any access to that webcam now, I would be showing it.
To Western interlocutors,
You can see what's happening there. There is Russians, though, unloaded there, and you've seen the tanks go by the webcam several times before it got shut down. Like I said, internet to most of Ukraine has been shut down. Definitely most of Kiev, almost all of Kiev, blocking and censoring internet so nothing can get out of what's actually happening there.
And that's only at the senior-most levels.
We are lucky enough to have these webcams, though, available right now
with our Ukrainian
that we are
partners about
using.
the challenges they're facing, about the ways we will continue to support them. Their security needs, their humanitarian needs, their economic needs, their political needs. But I wouldn't want to characterize it beyond that. Yes.
The President Zelensky also made an appeal for a no-fly zone. Is any consideration being given to that?
We are in regular dialogue, as I just said, with our Ukrainian partners. We are looking at a range of ways we can continue to support them, but I wouldn't want to go beyond that. Lalit.
On the halt in the bilateral talks with Russia, can you give us a couple of examples of issues that are of such significant national security interest that they will continue?
Well, I'll offer one at least. Of course, it remains in our interest to see to it that Iran is never able to acquire a nuclear weapon. The fact that Russia has now invaded Ukraine should not give Iran the green light to develop a nuclear weapon, to weaponize, to move towards the point at which it can quickly acquire a nuclear weapon. It remains as in our interest today to deny Iran that ability than it was on Saturday. Lalit.
Wait, hold on. Okay, that's one, but the
No.
list that I saw includes the Arctic Council. It includes climate change talks. Is there anything significant that, does it include the strategic dialogue?
We have no plans to take part in another strategic dialogue at the moment.
At the moment. And again, all of this stuff is suspension. It's not permanent. So should Russia change its
The point
course, these would resume.
Much like sanctions, these are a means to an end. What we are trying to do is to change on an urgent basis Moscow's behavior, to bring this violence to an end, to bring this conflict to an end, to bring the suffering that Russia is inflicting on the Ukrainian people to an end. Lalit.
Context of the Russian-Ukrainian crisis. India has a strong relationship with Russia and so has with the United States as well. Has the Ukrainian crisis strained India-US relationship?
We have a broad strategic partnership with India. As you know, we had an opportunity to see our Indian counterpart, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, in Australia just the other day when we were in the Indo-Pacific for a meeting of the Quad. What we have done, including in the context of the bilateral discussion we had with Foreign Minister Jaishankar in in Melbourne, was to share our fervent belief that countries around the world, especially those countries that have a level of influence, of clout, of leverage with the Russian Federation, needed to use that to good effect, needed to use that to protect the rules-based international order, again, that have worked to the benefit of the United States, that have worked to the benefit of our European allies, that have worked to the benefit of India, and, quite frankly, have worked to the benefit of the Russian Federation over the course of some 70 years. We share important interests with India. We share important values with India. And we know India has a relationship with Russia that is distinct from the relationship that we have with Russia. Of course, that is okay. What we have asked of every country around the world is that they use that leverage to good effect to uphold those norms, those rules that have been at the center, again, of unprecedented levels over the past 70 years of security, of stability, and prosperity.
No, they're asking for Ukraine's asking for a no-fly zone, but this is the airlines, of course. This is Ukraine. I don't see any airline flying anywhere over Ukraine, or even close to the battle. So what happened? There's a lot of propaganda being spread, but I can tell you this: Russian tanks are in Ukraine right now, or in Kiev. But as far as the no-fly zone, there is no commercial flights flying over Ukraine. I don't know where this guy is getting his information from, but he is only a State Department head, so he could just be pulling it out of his keister.
I will leave it to our Pakistani partners to speak to their position on this. What I can say is that we communicated to Pakistan our position on what was then the threat of a Russian invasion and what is now the ongoing Russian invasion against Ukraine. Just as India does, Pakistan knows precisely where we stand on this. These are, again, rules, norms, guidelines that benefit India, Pakistan, the United States.
Oh, India is not standing with us, though, but this guy says they are. That's really confusing, because that's even more confusing than what's happened before. And yeah, there's been a lot of propaganda coming out. Tanks are being destroyed, 2,000 Russian soldiers, and all this other garbage. If that was anywhere near true, Russia would already used other means very quickly.
Our Ukrainian partners. We want to see diplomacy. We want to see diplomacy succeed. And we want that precisely because only through diplomacy can we bring an end to this needless, unprovoked, brutal conflict, and only through diplomacy can we save lives on a sustainable basis. So first and most important, we want to see diplomacy. We want to see diplomacy succeed. A corollary to that, we want to know that Russia is actually interested in genuine diplomacy. It now appears quite clear that Russia was not and has not been interested in genuine diplomacy. They were interested in the pretense of diplomacy. As I said before, in the context of the ongoing invasion, diplomacy at the barrel of a gun, that is not genuine diplomacy. That is coercive diplomacy. That is coercion with the guise of diplomatic niceties. That is not something that can bring an end to this conflict in a way that we know it must end.
And my broader point, if I may, why do you think this military operation is taking place? Is this because the Russians are so inherently evil that they woke up one day and decided to attack a neighboring country? Or is it because of some broader and deeper roots that needs to be addressed? Like, for instance, the international security architecture doesn't work in its current form.
You'll have to ask that question of President Putin. Only he can give you a good answer only he can give you an answer. I'm not sure it'll be a good one to explain his decisions. But let me make one point.
We're showing an image that's kind of graphic. This is an image of a tank that's rolled over earlier today, a car. This is a graphic image I'm about to show you guys, so just be prepared with your stomach. Russian tank crushed this car earlier. The man was still inside. He did survive, but this is the image of after the tank rolled over his vehicle, him being pinned within the vehicle. He did survive. We don't know the extent of the damage yet or not, but very graphic. I mean, I want to share everything that's happening with you guys as I find it.
Every mass media, every element of the mass media.
There's a video of the tank
Russians
actually
will be
doing this.
body bags.
I am not going to show that because that is too graphic.
Effect on the Russian economy. This has already had consequential implications for Russia's strategic ambitions, both at the present and going forward. So this is not
well,
a
I feel it's
decision
too graphic.
judging
I
by
don't know.
what we're seeing from the
Maybe
Russian
I will
people
share it with you
themselves,
guys because I think you guys need to
that
see
they
it.
wanted to see. This is not a decision that many of them support. The American people, the United States government, we are standing on the side of those Russians who are peacefully taking to the streets to voice their concern, their criticism, their in some cases deep condemnation of what is going on, and to exert the rights that are as universal to them as they are to
I know
anyone
a lot of
anywhere
people are
else.
saying that video has
They
been
are doing
faked, or
this
this
in the
image has
face
been
of
faked on
continued crackdowns against the
online.
exercise of these very same universal rights.
I want to show you when it
This
actually
is,
happened
just as
earlier
we have
today.
said, of so many other tactics, straight from Putin's playbook. The fact that dissent.
This is that
of this
video of
nature,
the tank, of course,
peaceful
running over that
protests,
driver.
Peaceful
I'm
demonstrations.
sorry, I gotta
are,
show you guys though, because this really did happen
quashed,
today, and
crushed,
it needs to be
in
seen.
short order. That is
A lot of rumors are being
symptomatic
stated that this video is
of
not real,
a
and that
deep-seated
never happened, or that photo's not real. Russian transporter lost control. They went right over the
This
vehicle.
was a decision, a reckless, brutal, costly decision by President
very
Putin.
heart-wrenching.
We are under no illusions that this has
Very,
affected
very
the Russian
heart-wrenching.
people, and in fact, we're seeing the Russian people that this is something they reject.
States like to see a resumption of talks on security
The gunfire in the background. This is inside of Kiev. This happened inside of Kiev earlier today.
The
So.
onset of this needless war, we had made a genuine, good faith offer together with our allies and partners to discuss with the Russian Federation certain areas where we thought we could make progress on a reciprocal basis. These would have been discussions about, just as you said, broader European security architecture, the placement of offensive missiles in Europe, arms control protocols, arms control agreements, steps when it comes to stability, transparency as well. That was very much on the table. The Russian Federation, again, engaged in this pretense of diplomacy with us. There was an exchange, as everyone knows by now, of written proposals, written responses. There were high-level meetings, all of which culminated in what we've now seen, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, perhaps an invasion that was planned all along. That is not our near-term priority. Our near-term priority for diplomacy going forward is to bring, as quickly as possible, an end to this needless violence, this brutality that the Russian Federation is directing against the Ukrainian state, against the Ukrainian government, and against the Ukrainian people. That is our near-term focus.
Can I go back to the bilateral talks just for a second? Because I think I asked the wrong question. I should have, instead of asking you what is exempted, because I've seen the list of exemptions, and it's frankly huge. Can you give us an example of the kinds of talks that now are no longer going to take place?
You're asking me to...
Well, I mean, are we talking about cultural exchanges or what? I mean, because if
Matt,
you look at the list of stuff that's
Terrible
exempted,
what's
you
happening
start
there.
with the
Terrible
basic
what's happening in
You go to
Ukraine.
climate, you go to COVID, you go to anything having to do with consular affairs.
What you will
go
see...
to anything that the seventh floor thinks is significant enough, which could be anything. So I'm just wondering, what is it?
You will
that is-
see-
you
you will
have
see-
the Arctic Council in there.
you will
have
see-
every single.
You will see a focus on our core national security interests.
Yeah, but every international organization, contact with the Russians at every international organization is carved out. It's exempted from this.
Matt, I'm not sure this
I'm
question...
going from the ICAO to the Arctic Council to the OSCE. To
We are going to
Well, I know.
pursue...
So what has been banned or halted because of this directive?
We are going to pursue what is in our national security interests. Some of the things you just listed are fundamental to our national security interests. Just because Russia has taken this action doesn't mean that we should stop caring about our own security, the well-being, the welfare, the safety, the security of the American people. You've seen for yourself at least what purports to be a list of areas where we need to engage, we might need to engage to pursue those core national security interests. I will leave it to your well-informed imagination what might not meet that criteria.
I'm just wondering, can you point to something specific that is now no longer able to be talked about with Russians bilaterally because of this? Because it just seems like almost everything that one can imagine, except for, I don't know, licensing for artwork to come to be loaned to a museum
the Russian,
is included.
The
is
unprovoked
exempted.
Russian invasion of Ukraine has changed our bilateral relationship. So, please, Vivian. About what's up?
Arms talks.
So-
Are they off the table completely now?
At this point, we do not have any plans for the next iteration of the strategic stability dialogue. Arms control is an area, whether it's in the context of the JCPOA, if you want to consider that an arms control agreement, or the fact that the United States and the Russian Federation have the two largest nuclear arsenals on the planet. It would remain in our national security interests to see to it that nuclear material, nuclear warheads, that nuclear stockpiles remain under control, in the positive control of the Russian Federation, that stockpiles that remain, that nuclear arsenals remain small as possible. Certainly, arms control is something that will continue to be in our national security interest, but we don't have another iteration of the strategic stability dialogue planned.
I have a specific thing on that. So today, in London, they canceled the performance of the ball.
And thank you again to all of our viewers who have been here with us on Live Now from Fox. Do want to let everyone know.
Now I'm going to show you guys another video here. This is some of the fakes that are going on, and I want to show you because there is fakes going on, and people need to see it. This is a fake video that is being released saying that a nuclear bomb has went off. As you can see, the real video on the right side, no explosion. The left is the same exact video with an explosion added to make it look like a nuclear bomb has went off. There's been no nuclear explosion as of at this point. Make sure that's clear. No nuclear explosion at this point. No nuclear explosion at this point. Now we are going to be waiting for the president to come on here and speak momentarily. There's a lot going on out there, though. A lot of people still trying to get out of Ukraine. As we're watching live out here. Everything is happening really quick. Of course, nothing seems to be slowing down anytime soon. We're national interest in attacking Iran. Iran was a threat to our nation. What was this? This is the thing, though. We're going to end up going to war here. One way or another, one of the nations is going to be calling Article 5. We already have the standings for Article 5 for a lot of nations because of cyber attacks that have happened on them from Russia. Depends on when they're going to call Article 5, though. That's going to be the big sign of what's going to happen next. It could be as late this weekend, or it could be as early as tonight. We don't know. We have to keep everything happening. Of course, everything going at once, trying to make sure we are live, covering everything that can happen. Terribly, I mean, it's been a crazy time out here. Crazy, crazy time. White House is supposed to come on live here and just momentarily, though, and give up new sanctions. I'm not sure when this is going to happen. Actually, Press Secretary Pulaski, I guess, is supposed to come on first. I don't know. I can't keep track of them. But that's supposed to start in about 45 minutes ago. It was supposed to start. It still has not started yet. So we'll be waiting for that as well. I imagine that she will not come on. The briefing will actually be the president coming on. This is the capital city of Kiev right here. There's been attacks in Kiev all around so far, and Ukraine. There's a lot more attacks actually that happened than this one. But if we look at Kiev right now, it looks pretty calm. There's a lot of feeds of Ukraine as we're speaking. These are the only live feeds we have right now inside of Kiev, or inside. Definitely getting interesting. Definitely getting interesting out there very quickly. Said air traffic has been rerouted all around Ukraine and, of course, around the Russian peninsula that has been entering Ukraine. So air traffic looks calm right now. We are going to go back over here. There's some soldiers speaking English or not, though.
Display that people haven't seen before, but also.
But these are Russian soldiers, or Ukrainian soldiers, sorry, not Russian. Going on out there, right? Waiting for the White House to go live, though, like I said. Give an update on what sanctions are going to be put in place. We have a feeling they will pull Russia's SWIFT ticket, which gives Russia the ability to use SWIFT. So if they do pull that, that will take Russia out of the banking system altogether, the international banking system. It's yet to be seen. Yet to be seen so far, so we're waiting on that. Quickly as anything happens, though, something happens and everything changes in a moment. Like I said, there was Ukraine that says as what's Ukraine saying now, I guess 20,000 troops are inside of Kiev right now, so 20,000 troops. That's what I'm saying. That's what Kiev is claiming, of course, or that's what Ukraine is claiming. We do not know that for sure, but that's what they're claiming as of this moment. Trying to keep everything going and make sure I get the most updated information for you as soon as it comes available. We respect everybody's opinion here. Billy, actually, the NATO or Russia has attacked. Not attacked physically, but they have cyber attacks on France and Germany so far, have been hit very hard. NATO is itching to get in the fight. NATO already has an entry with the Turkish ship got bombed yesterday by a mortar round from a Russian land crew. So that mortar round that did hit the Turkish ship yesterday gives NATO every right to enter this war. Article 5 is called at any point now. We could be at World War III, and there's 3 countries now that can call Article 5 as of right now. If Russia does, in fact, use actions against the U.S., which they're claiming they're going to momentarily, use cyber attacks against the U.S., and Russia is saying that again. Yes, cyber attacks against France and Germany.
Oh, there's about to be a Bardia state right next door. Wow. So
We're at the White House here. Let's see what the press conference is going to be talking about. They're not even announcing on major news right now. They don't want to announce that the banking system could have been compromised. That's why I'm expecting SWIFT to be pulled. Expecting them to pull Russia's access to SWIFT, which is the banking system altogether. Waiting here for the White House to, of course, come on and speak to us. Quiet it down a little bit. I'll turn it back up. Here's the thing. Russia has not been kicked out of UN at all. United Nations. Russia is still part of the United Nations. Why? That's a game I would want to know.
All right.
Here
I
comes
just have one item for all of you at the top, which is a week ahead. And I know there are a few topics to discuss today during our time together. On Monday, the President will host a celebration to mark Black History Month. He will be joined by the Vice President, Black members of the historically diverse cabinet, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, state and local elected officials, civil rights leaders, and Divine Nine leadership. On Tuesday, as you are all tracking, the President will deliver his first State of the Union address. We will have more of his address to preview in the coming days. On Wednesday, the President and the First Lady will travel to Superior, Wisconsin to discuss how the bipartisan infrastructure law delivers for the American people by rebuilding roads and bridges and creating good-paying union jobs. And on Thursday, the President will hold a cabinet meeting. With that, Steve, why don't you kick us off?
The EU earlier today agreed to hold to place sanctions and asset freezes on Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Russian Foreign Minister. Is the United States going to follow suit?
Following a telephone conversation President Biden held with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and in alignment with the decision by our European allies, the United States will join them in sanctioning President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov and members of the Russian National Security Team. I expect we'll have more specific details out later this afternoon.
Thanks. Additionally, could you detail the level of support the United States government is currently providing operationally to the Ukrainian military and intelligence services as they try to fend off the Russian invasion? Is the U.S. continuing to send weaponry into Ukraine? Is it providing intelligence on Russian movements and tactical communications and the like?
Well, without getting into too many specific details that are sensitive for a range of reasons, we are continuing to deliver on the security assistance package that was announced earlier last fall. All of that has not been delivered yet. We're continuing to provide that assistance. Obviously, we are...
Yes, and if you don't know somebody personally that has a ham radio, get a CB radio, because chances are ham radio operators will be relaying messages through those networks if anything does happen here in the U.S.
Touch from our national security team with members of his team as well, and we continue to consider a range of options to provide additional assistance.
And President Zelensky last night said he was target number one of the Russian military. Does the United States have a warning to Russia in the event that that they were to target the Ukrainian president or attempt to capture him or to physically harm him?
Do we have a warning to them?
Yes,
well,
specifically regarding a head of state.
Well, let me first say that we have been warning for months that for weeks, if not months, that Kyiv falling, that attempts to overturn the leadership of Ukraine is very much in the aspirations of President Putin. So their attempts to do exactly that and their continued progress in moving toward Kyiv and moving toward Ukrainian leadership is aligned with what we have predicted. Obviously, going after the head of state would be a significant, horrific act by Russian leadership, but we remain in contact.
Mid-range missiles have just been heard hitting in Kiev. Mid-range missiles have just been heard hitting in Kiev.
Still in Ukraine, proudly and courageously standing up in the face of the Russian attack, and we are certainly continue to be concerned about the ongoing Russian assault on the country.
Topic, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention right now is announcing new federal mask guidelines that, including under them, 70% or so of Americans right now live in areas where they are no longer recommended to wear masks indoors in public settings. Is that guidance that will be followed here in the White House, as Washington, D.C. is now not an area recommended anymore for wearing masks?
Sure. Well, we are evaluating our protocols. Obviously, this guidance is just going out now as we speak. I believe Dr. Walensky continues to provide a briefing call with some of your colleagues right now. DC currently has a mask mandate until March 1st. We have always followed the most stringent guidelines. That has typically been the CDC, so we will plan to follow that. And in the meantime, we are evaluating our protocols here at the White House. Go ahead.
On President Zelensky, did in President Biden's phone call with him, did it come up whether did President Biden bring up whether President Zelensky he thinks he should leave the country or not?
That is not. I don't have any additional details to provide. President Zelensky continues to serve as president of Ukraine. He continues to do that courageously in the face of attacks from Russian military. This was a call for the president to reiterate our strong support for him, for the Ukrainian people, and to reiterate and condemn the actions of the Russians.
And on sanctioning Putin and Lavrov, yesterday President Biden had said that was
Yeah,
on the
we'll be
table.
going to the
What
Pentagon
changed
right after
between
this, and I'll
yesterday
be
and
covering the
today?
entire Pentagon
Well, it has
speech.
been under consideration and on the table for some time, as you know, and as I just conveyed, the president's strong view and strong principle from the beginning of this conflict, and even before, I should say, has been to take actions and steps in alignment with our European partners, and this is certainly evidence of that.
Just finally on that one, what does sanctioning Putin himself do in the opinion of this administration? A lot of analysts have said that this is more of a symbolic move than anything.
Well, without getting into any specific details, I know you're not exactly asking me this, but sort of about financial assets, et cetera. I will leave that to others to speak to. Certainly the united, this step that we are doing in alignment and in coordination with the Europeans just sends a clear message about the strength of the opposition to the actions by President Putin and the direction in his leadership of the Russian military. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, and continuing the questions on sanctions.
Yep.
Today we saw that the Italian government and the German government both said very clearly that they would not veto a move to remove Russia from the SWIFT transaction system. Can you say a word about how quickly you think something like that would happen, and whether you believe that that would be another productive tool and perhaps another moment, symbolic or rather an important measure?
Sure. Well, again, the president's principle is taking steps in alignment. We are stronger together, especially as we stand in the face of the Russian military's actions and their invasion of Ukraine. As it relates to SWIFT, we've never taken that off the table, of course, and I'm certainly not taking it off the table today, so certainly there'll be ongoing discussions about that. As you know, SWIFT is a messaging service that connects 11,000 banks, and many would argue that there are ways that the Russian leadership could get around that over the course of time, but it certainly remains an option on the table. In terms of the timeline, I don't have anything to predict for you on that.
We were also reported today that China has actually increased its reserves as opposed to releasing reserves, which could help perhaps with the energy price increases that we're seeing. Have you had, what do you think of that move? And then also, has there been any further communication? Does President Biden intend to talk to President Xi, or can you say a word about what you're doing in terms of trying to convince the Chinese to be supportive?
Well, I would note that also today the IEA had an informal meeting where they discussed options they could take over the coming days and weeks to help address any volatility in the global markets and the heightening of price volatility. And certainly that meeting today was a chance to consult and continue coordination with partners on global energy supply and security. There's also continuing conversations that we have had from here with partners over the past day. Secretary Granholm spoke with French, German, EU, and UK counterparts yesterday, and we'll continue those conversations. As it relates to China, I would say that The president's view, of course, is that now is the time for leaders of the world to not just speak out clearly against President Putin's flagrant aggression and to stand with the people of Ukraine, but this is not a moment for equivocation or hiding or waiting to see what happens next. It is already clear what's happening, and as a part of that, it's also important to be a part of the effort to mitigate and minimize the impact on global markets and global oil markets. And so I don't have any additional conversations to read out for you, but I would say certainly we all want to be part of the solution here and stand up in the face of aggression to help address the problems.
Are you saying that China is in fact equivocating?
All I'm saying is that every country should think about what side of history they want to be on here, and they have the ability to do that. Go ahead.
When did President Biden make the final decision to sanction President Putin?
It was made, it's been on the table for some time, but through coordination and discussion with our European partners over the last day or so.
So he decided in the last 24 hours that he was going to do that?
Again, it's been on the table for some time. His priority and his focus has been on taking steps in coordination, and obviously that decision was made over the course of the last 24 hours and in partnership with our European counterparts.
Does it include a travel ban by chance?
I believe that would be a part of the U.S. Component, yes.
So President Putin would be banned from traveling here?
There's more details of it that, again, will be out later today. There are very
doesn't
limited
know
examples
anything.
of
Leave her
this
alone.
being done, as you all know, but that is a standard part. But again, there'll be more details we will have available later today.
Another question on travel. The UK is banning civilian Russian aircraft from its airspace, saying that no aircraft on a service owned, operated, or chartered by a person connected with Russia shall fly in their airspace. Is the United States planning to do the same?
I'm not aware of that being in the plans, but I don't have anything to preview for you.
Okay, and another question. We've seen these predictions from the Defense Department, from the State Department about Kyiv falling to Russia. They've made clear that they believe that is in Putin's sights and that he wants to overthrow the government there. If that happens, what does the U.S. do? What is the response and the role that the United States takes after something like that happens?
Well, I would just reiterate, as we've been warning for months, that Kyiv falling is a real possibility, and we've continued to see Russia's progression. Even as we've seen resistance on the ground, Russia's military continues to advance toward Kyiv. So there is that real possibility. I'm just not going to get into, at this point, hypotheticals of what that will look like or what our response would be.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I just want to follow up on the Putin sanctions again.
Sure.
Based on what you've said so far. So was this decision to coordinate with allies meant to show unity, meant to show that Putin is a pariah, or do you think it will actually have an impact on Putin in practice, given the uncertainty about the extent and location of his wealth?
Sure, I understand what you're asking. I'm just not going to get into specifics about his financial assets from here. Again, I think what is important and what we are hoping the world takes away from this is the unity through which the United States, President Biden, is working with our European partners and allies.
Without getting into details, can you even say if this will or will not impact him, other than showing that he's, an outlier?
Again, I'm not going to get into his personal financial assets. That's typically not something we would do from here. But I would note again that the steps that were taken yesterday and announced yesterday, sanctioning the 10 of the largest financial institutions in Russia, accounting for a huge percentage of their banking capacity, of their financial system capacity, I should say, and even the anticipation of that, has had an enormous impact on Russia, whether it's the currency, the ruble that has fallen, the markets, skyrocketing inflation in Russia. And we also have taken steps to sanction oligarchs around President Putin, people who have benefited from corruption and cronyism in the system, and even their family members to prevent them from having the capacity to move around their assets.
And on the Supreme Court today, the day, it was exactly 2 years ago today that the president made a pledge that he would nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court. Did he factor the timing of that into his decision to announce it today?
No.
Okay. And then can you share any details about the process now that it's over?
Finally, we're free.
How long the interview or interviews were, what they talked about? What led the president to choose Judge Jackson over the other candidates?
Sure. Well, I will share with you the details that we're comfortable sharing at this point in time. And obviously, Judge Jackson will be filling out a range of questionnaires. She will be testifying. She will be considered by the full Senate, and she will be asked a range of questions there. The president interviewed Judge Jackson, Judge Childs, and Judge Kruger on Monday, February 14th in person. He made his final decision and called Judge Jackson last night. Last evening, I would note it was after the press briefing last evening. The president called Leader Schumer, Senator McConnell, Speaker Pelosi, and Whip Clyburn all separately this morning to inform them of his decision. I'd also note that the vice president has been very engaged, not just in the decision-making process, as the president talked about during his remarks, but she called former President Obama and former President Clinton as well, and she has also been calling a range of members of Congress as a part of the announcement process.
One more, did he personally call Kruger and Childs to let them know that he had chosen Judge Jackson?
I don't have any other details on that, but I can tell you that he called Judge Jackson to offer her to tell her he was going to nominate her last evening. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. The State Department just said about the U.S. and Russia that there are still some areas in which the fulfillment of our national security priorities and imperatives require us to engage and coexist. How is it that we are still engaging and coexisting with the Russians?
Well, Peter, I would say diplomacy around the world requires us to engage with countries even where we have strong disagreements, strong opposition, strong condemnation. We have been very outspoken and taken actions against China's human rights abuses, but we have worked with them in other capacities. We are working Russia as a part of the P5+1 as we're working and making progress on an Iran nuclear deal. There's no question that achievement of that would make the world safer. So it is our responsibility, and diplomacy means engaging even with countries where you have strong disagreement and strong opposition.
And just so that we can understand then the approach, that means that you guys will sit here and sanction Vladimir Putin and then send diplomats to go sit on the same side of the table with the Russians to hash out the Iran deal. Is that what's happening?
That's right, Peter, but I don't know why you sound so skeptical. What our job here in the United States and from any government is to take steps that are in the interest of the American people and the United States of America. And part of that would certainly be reducing Iran's capacity and ability to have a nuclear weapon. I think there's no question about that. Russia is a part of the P5+1.
Okay, there's a report in the New York Times that you guys kept asking China to help you stop Russia from invading Ukraine, and they didn't. So what have you guys done throughout this slow-moving Russia crisis that has worked?
In what capacity?
Well, the president talked to Putin, he talked to the G7, he threatened sanctions, he put sanctions in place. Now he says the sanctions are going to take 30 days, or about a month. Do you guys think the people in Ukraine have about a month?
Well, Peter, let me just take a step back and explain to everyone how diplomacy works and how our approach from the United States has worked. What the president has done is he has built a global coalition to stand up in the face of President Putin and President Putin's aggression and invasion of Ukraine. What he has done is he has rallied the world, our European partners, even at cost to them in some capacities, to put in place significant sanctions, historic sanctions that would have a enormous impact on the Russian financial sector. It is President Putin's choice to go to war and invade Ukraine. That is what he has done. It is our choice and our responsibility and the role of the president in the United States to rally opposition and make sure they feel significant pain from that choice. That's exactly what we have done.
And I understand that you're saying that these sanctions will have an impact on Russia, but what good does that do these people in Ukraine who are seeing the news and these U.S. intel assessments that Kiev is going to fall any day?
Well, Peter, first of all, we are the largest provider of humanitarian assistance, of security assistance in the world to the Ukrainian government, which still stands, and the biggest supporter of the Ukrainian people, and we will continue to be. And we are leading this global effort to stand up against the aggression of President Putin. And so the president is doing nearly everything in his power to lead the world and stand up against the actions of President Putin. What he will not do is send U.S. troops to fight in Ukraine, because he is not going to put the American public, the American people, or the United States in a position of fighting a war with Russia. Go ahead.
If I can ask you about, we've been watching a lot of the pictures play out from overseas. We've seen anti-war protesters rounded up and arrested in Moscow and elsewhere throughout Russia. We've seen awful pictures coming from throughout Ukraine, including one today that was dramatic of a Russian tank literally rolling over a Ukrainian civilian vehicle. Can you just give us a sense, is the president watching this happen, his reaction to this, his message to those anti-war protesters?
Well, I mean, it's horrific to watch. It's heart-wrenching to watch. And we've all seen the images. The president, the vice president, members of our national security team, and it almost doesn't matter how much you've been through, how many conflicts you've watched over time, and he has unfortunately watched many in a variety of national security roles, to feel heartbroken by what you're seeing happen in Ukraine, in a sovereign country that is having its right to exist threatened by Russia, the aggressor in this case. I would say our message to the Ukrainian people continues to be that we stand with you, we support you, we are going to do everything, humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, continue to provide security assistance, and rally the world to condemn the actions of President Putin.
And to the anti-war protesters in Russia?
Well, first, I think we would say that we are amazed by your courage, your remarkable courage in standing up against what President Putin is doing. It is not easy to protest in many scenarios, but it's certainly not easy to protest against the actions of an autocratic leader, and that's exactly what these protesters are doing.
There's a large room. I'll ask only one last question, which is, as it relates to the Supreme Court, following up on the questions here. The president wanted it to be a bipartisan process, has met with many Republicans, Chuck Grassley, the top Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee. 3 Republicans helped confirm Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson in the spring of last year. One of them, Lindsey Graham, today said, among other things, that this selection means the radical left has won President Biden over yet again. The White House's response.
Well, I think what's most important for everybody to know and understand is more about Judge Jackson's record. And what was very compelling and to go back to Weij's question, sorry I didn't answer this part, what was compelling to the president. I talked to him about this morning, and you heard him lay this out in great detail in his remarks. Judge Jackson is someone who very much is in the mold of Justice Breyer, having even clerked for him. She talked about that during his remarks. When she was confirmed as a district judge in 2013, Judge Breyer praised her for being a wise decision and swore her in. And even parts of their biography overlap, time on the Sentencing Commission, time as a federal judge. But it's also how she has approached her role as a judge that was very compelling to the president. She's issued opinions without regard to partisan considerations. She's ruled in favor of Republicans and Democrats. She's ruled for and against the government, regardless of whether the government is led by a Democratic president or a Republican president. Litigants, lawyers, and judges across the ideological spectrum appreciate her ability to be an impartial adjudicator, and that's exactly what you want as a judge. She's even clerked for 3 different federal judges who were appointed by presidents of different political parties. So I would just note all of that to suggest that anyone who is already ruling her out without even meeting with her, engaging with her, and reviewing her extensive record as a fair and just judge, there may be other reasons for that.
Thank you.
So go ahead.
Thanks. Do you have any update on the hostages that were reported to be taken at
Chernobyl? I unfortunately don't have an update on that from here at this point. I can check for you after the briefing.
Does the U.S. have any plans to speed up the refugee processing for Ukrainians that do want to come to the U.S., as they did with Afghans that wanted to come to the U.S.?
Well, it's a slightly different circumstance, I will say, because our assessment is that the majority of refugees will want to go to neighboring countries in Europe, many of which have already conveyed publicly that they will accept any refugee who needs a home, whether it's Poland or Germany, and there are probably others who have made those comments. So we are really working in close lockstep with our European counterparts about what the needs are and how to help from our end meet those needs. That certainly means an openness to accepting refugees from Ukraine, but also making sure that all of these neighboring countries who are willing to welcome these refugees, have our support in that effort. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. I know the White House has said the U.S. won't be sending troops into Ukraine to rescue Americans who are still there. So what is the U.S. doing about Americans who are still left in Ukraine as the situation gets more dire?
Well, I will first start by saying that we have been warning for months now about the dire circumstances developing in Ukraine and conveying very directly to American citizens they should leave. We have also been in touch from the State Department with every American we can reach. I would point you to them for more specifics on that. And we continue to have the capacity to, help them in a range of ways, even as we don't have a diplomatic presence in Ukraine. We don't have people in the country right now, obviously, but they are in neighboring countries. I would really point you to the State Department for any more specifics.
The president is obviously now going to be in Delaware this weekend. Can you share what he will be doing there? Will he be traveling with members of his national security team? Will he be receiving regular updates on Ukraine?
Sure. He will have a meeting with members of his national security team tomorrow in Delaware. I will note that while every president can work from anywhere they are, because that is how presidencies are equipped, he is traveling to Delaware for the memorial service of a family member, and he will be, that is why he's traveling there this weekend. Go ahead.
Just to follow up on that question, does the president have special secure facilities in Wilmington? We know that obviously at Camp David, that is something available. Given the national security crisis, is that something that is also available?
The president has the capacity to make a secure call from anywhere he is, yes.
Okay. And then on the Supreme Court, how important is it to the president that Judge Jackson receives bipartisan support if she is confirmed, and how much political capital and time and energy is he personally going to put in to getting Republican support for her nomination?
Well, I think, Tyler, let me flip this around a little bit for you and just say the president's view is that when you look at somebody like Judge Jackson, who is extraordinarily qualified, has impeccable credentials. She has been lauded by former Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, who said on her behalf when she was put forward last year, I know she's clearly qualified, but it bears repeating just how qualified she is. Our politics may differ, but my praise for Ketanji's intellect, for her character, for her intellect is unequivocal. That she is somebody who has, and I would also note that former D.C. District Judge Thomas Griffith, appointed by President George W. Bush, publicly supported her D.C. court nomination, and she received a bipartisan letter of support from individuals who co-clerked along Judge Jackson. So I think the bar here should not be what is the president going to do? Of course he's going to engage with Democrats and Republicans. You've seen him operate in that way to date. It is what are Republicans going to do in terms of considering an eminently qualified judge that the president has nominated, who by many standards has shown herself to issue opinions without regard to partisan considerations and ruled in a way that certainly anyone, regardless of their political affiliation, would be proud to see.
And then just one more quick one on the State of the Union. How much is that speech being changed by the Russia-Ukraine crisis? Can you just give us a little bit of a preview about what we may hear from the president on Tuesday?
I certainly understand the question, but I can't give you a preview of a speech 4 days from now quite yet about and how it will address a developing conflict. Go ahead.
President Biden stated from the outset, and you've reiterated today, that he won't send U.S. troops to Ukraine to fight Russians. Given the high stakes, President Biden yesterday said Russia has aspirations beyond Ukraine. Why isn't this a fight worth sending U.S. troops for? Why, why has the president assessed that shouldn't be an option?
Well, I would say first it's important to note that we have certainly made clear, not just by words, but by actions, that we are going to continue to support and even plus up our support for NATO defense operations. And there was an announcement yesterday of an increase of additional 7,000 troops. And obviously there was a significant announcement made today by NATO. We will firmly stand behind our Article 5 obligations. But I would say, as it relates to sending U.S. troops into Ukraine, the role of the President of the United States, any president, is to make an assessment about what is in the interest of the United States, our national security interests, the American people, and certainly weigh very heavily how we're leading the global community. But it is not in our interest to be in a war with Russia. And so, no, we are not sending U.S. troops to Ukraine.
Well, by stating up front that this is not an option, didn't President Biden take away what could have been a threat to deter Putin from invading and to further push into Ukraine?
I think the president believes he has a responsibility to be very direct with the American people about what his intentions are and what his intentions are not. And that is his first priority as president.
And finally, what was the White House's reaction to President Zelensky today in a video address saying that Ukraine is, quote, been left alone to defend itself against Russia?
Well, as you know, the president spoke with President Zelensky and made clear to him during that conversation that he commended his brave leadership, his brave actions, the brave actions of the Ukrainian people who are fighting to defend their country. He also conveyed our ongoing economic, humanitarian, and security support that we will continue to provide. So that is hardly standing on the sidelines. We are providing, again, the largest provider of security, economic, humanitarian assistance of any country in the world, and we will continue to support President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people.
The White House doesn't think he's been left alone?
I think I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Jen. Does the administration have any plans to offer TPS to Ukrainians who are in the United States or who might end up coming to the United States? Does it support the idea?
Well, it's a process that would be overseen by the interagency, go through an interagency process led by the Department of Homeland Security. I know there are many advocates for that, but I don't have an update on the process or if it will happen.
What plans does the administration, in regard to refugees,
Sure.
What plans does the administration have to take in, for the United States, to take in some refugees in the United States? Have there been any planning discussions, perhaps with refugee groups, to prepare this? Do you have an anticipated number of how many refugees may come to the
I don't have an anticipated number to project. What I will convey to you is that we are always in constant contact with the refugee organizations who do incredible work around the world. But I would also reiterate that what we've seen happen over the last couple of days is countries like Poland, Germany, and others in Europe make clear that they are opening their arms to welcome refugees from Ukraine. Those are neighboring countries, so we do anticipate the vast majority will want to go to countries in Europe.
But you do anticipate that some would come to the United States?
We are open to that, yes.
And if I could ask one more. Senator Coons floated the idea of a $10 billion emergency supplemental package. Does the administration support that proposal?
We are having ongoing conversations with Congress about additional assistance to Ukraine. Our OMB leadership is having those conversations, and so I will leave it to them to put out any updated specific number from our end, but those are underway. Go ahead.
Why doesn't President Biden want to talk to Vladimir Putin right now?
Because he's invading a sovereign country.
Isn't he going to be potentially invading that for years on end?
Well, I would say that a moment where a leader is beginning and in the middle of invading a sovereign country is not the moment where diplomacy feels appropriate. It does not mean we have ruled out diplomacy.
Okay, obviously she doesn't know anything she's talking about. So we're going to cut over to the Pentagon now and listen to what they have to say. Hopefully they have a little bit more information to give us. I'm going to restart the briefing of the Pentagon lot, so it'll be right now. It'll start from the beginning, okay?
Thank you, John. So two things on that point. President Biden just announced that he has ordered additional forces to Europe. And is that part of what you just described? And the second question is, so NATO has activated a portion of the the response force, and you can't say how many troops the U.S. will contribute to that because they haven't asked for any troops yet?
Yeah, so I think in the president's statement, I think he was referring to his announcement yesterday. This was a readout of his call with President Zelensky, and he was reiterating that in that conversation, he was pointing back to the announcement that he made yesterday. So I have no new announcements of force deployments to speak to today. Think about this activation a bit like you would an RFF, a request for forces, right? So it's now been activated, and so we'll be in direct consultations with NATO and General Walters in his sack your hat to work through what the requirements are going to be for the NATO response force and the very ready joint task force. And as I've said many times before, the Secretary is very, very committed to making sure that whatever those requirements are, that the United States is ready to lean forward as much as possible. Yesterday's announcement, the 7,000 that we talked about, as I also said yesterday, portions of them we can expect will be earmarked for the NATO response force. Again, after we've consulted with General Walters and NATO and we understand what they need, but one of the reasons why President Biden pushed them forward was so that they could be ready for just such a need. And we wanted to get the clock going to get them pre-positioned, if you will. So there's still some homework to be done, still some math that needs to be worked out. But again, the Secretary wanted to make sure, and the President obviously wants to make sure, that we're leaning as far forward as we can.
But it likely would be an armored brigade, among other things.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. Again, we're gonna work closely with NATO and make sure that we fully understand what the requirements are from the United States perspective, and then we'll move forward. But a good chunk of the 7,000 we talked about yesterday, we believe will be earmarked for NATO contributions. Again, if it's deemed that they are needed, they're wanted, and they're ready. And if they aren't, well then they can be used unilaterally to support and reassure our allies. For the President and for the Secretary, this was very much about trying to lean forward. So I don't have any specifics to say today, specific units or timelines or schedules, but I want to point back to what we said all along, that the United States, we take this commitment very, very seriously, and we're going to lean in as much as we can. Okay? Idris?
Part of criticism has been we're now 2 days into the invasion. This was seen coming, a couple of weeks ago. Why are there still such few details? And if the need is so urgent, they could roll in through Kiev in the coming days. Why not be able to give more details about what units are going where? Why aren't there, I guess, as many details?
I'm not sure what Russian operations in Kyiv has to do with the timing of how soon we can identify units, Idris. If I may, very politely, just challenge the premise here. We have been, the United States in particular, has been very forward-leaning in terms of reassuring allies. And with each muscle movement, we've been right up here talking about it and identifying them to the level of specificity that we can, as we did again yesterday. But the way the process works in NATO is you have to approve a defense plan first, and then the activation comes second. That happened today. The heads of state approved defense plans, which then gave General Walters as SACEUR the authorization he needed to authorize activation of the NRF, and then now it goes to the nations to fill those needs. But we have to be in consultation with NATO about what those needs are. Again, to my answer to Bob, it's not unlike a request for forces. It's just a different process, but it's the same idea. So I don't think that we're not waiting on anything. As a matter of fact, quite the contrary. The Secretary's orders authorized by the President yesterday actually put a good chunk of troops coming from the States going to Europe so that they can be ready for just these kinds of needs.
Just one clarification. So how many troops are prepared to deploy orders now? Is it still 8,500?
No, it's north of that. And I've said that publicly before. It's several thousand more north of the 8,500 that was originally put on prepare to deploy. Jen.
John, President Zelensky has made a passionate appeal to the U.S. and NATO to set up a no-fly zone over Ukraine. They have fought, as you've said, valiantly on the ground. Russia does not have air superiority right now. Why not set up that no-fly zone at Ukraine's request?
Look, that's a policy decision at the nation-state level. I haven't seen the request that President Zelensky has made. I would just tell you.
He said they've been set up in Syria, where there are Russian warplanes. It's been set up in the past. There's historical precedent for it. Why not unite NATO, European nations to set up a no-fly zone?
I would just tell you that would have to be a discussion inside the alliance. The President has been very clear that U.S. troops will not be fighting in Ukraine, and that our focus is on helping them defend themselves, and we've done that. And we're going to continue to look for ways to do that and to shore up our NATO allies and our defenses on NATO territory.
How would you characterize the fighting in the last 36 hours in terms of the Ukrainian fighting and what Russia's experienced?
Well, you know, I'm a little loath to get into a blow-by-blow here from the Pentagon podium on operations that we're not involved in. I would just tell you, broadly speaking, that we see clear indications that the Ukrainian armed forces are fighting back and bravely defending their country. And we also see indications that there have been measures of success in that regard because, again, without getting into a blow-by-blow, it's not apparent to us that
Without telling the U.S. citizens the truth is what he means. By blow, without telling the United States citizens what's really happening, we're going to keep here and lie to you guys repeatedly over the air, and hopefully Americans buy into it.
In a predictive way right now, and we'll watch it as closely as we can. But they are fighting back. They are fighting for their country, and they're doing so bravely.
You're saying Russians are facing setbacks on the battlefield from what you can
Our
see?
understanding is that they have experienced some setbacks. Yes. Let's go, Megan.
On the forces who have been put on alert and then activated. Earlier this month, it was 8,500. The Pentagon has said since then that there were more people put on prepare to deploy orders. The Pentagon has also said that the 7,000 troops activated yesterday, some of them had been on that part of that original 8,500, some of them weren't. So my question is, how many troops total since the beginning of this month have been put on prepare to deploy orders?
We're not going to discuss that
Prepare to
number.
deploy orders after this activation yesterday.
Megan, I don't have an exact figure for you. As I said, it's been several thousand more in addition to the 8,500. So somewhere between 10 and 12,000 total have been put on prepare to deploy or accelerated. Some of them were already on PTDO, and we shortened that tether. For instance, in some cases from 10 to 5 days. Some of that number wasn't on heightened alert, and so we did put them on PTDO, prepare to deploy orders. It varies by unit and by capability, and I don't have an exact breakdown of what is going to be going as a part of this NATO response force.
The problem is we deployed a whole bunch of soldiers today over the 8,500 number, and now there's another 12,000 prepared to deploy that got added. And he doesn't want to give a total number because the number of total deployment plus the people who were deployed today and the PTD number would be ridiculous for Americans to conceive. There were 50,000 troops now ready to deploy or been deployed.
Earmarked for the NATO response force. Some of those units are simply that the Secretary wanted to make sure they were more ready to go. In a unilateral capacity. Some may be perfectly placed to be used for the VJTF. We'll have to see what the requirements look like. So it's not binary. It's not, well, that's all. These troops are just designated for NATO, and these troops are just designated for unilateral. These units that the president announced yesterday, that 7,000.
The 3 carrier fleets we have detached right now into NATO's deployment, 3 carrier fleets that are detached into NATO's deployment are ready. Take well over the 8,500 number, just to give you guys an idea. They don't want to tell you guys because people will be afraid of the number of troops we already have deployed in the situation. The 8,500 number probably equals not even a deployment and a half of 1 Air Force carrier troop. That's according to the support ships and submarines and everything else that goes with it. So we have 3 of those deployed with NATO, plus we have, I think, 12,000 troops in Poland, something like 6,500 in Germany. We have troops everywhere right now in the UN.
To prepare the troops, what would trigger NATO to deploy them? Would it be Russian troops going to the west of Ukraine, or what kind of threat would trigger their effective deployment?
That really is a decision for the NAC to make, for the alliance to make. It wouldn't be a unilateral U.S. decision. I think today's approval of the defense plan and the activation itself, as I said, is historic. First time that they have been so activated. That's a big deal. Now, again, what does it look like? How many? And where does the alliance want to place them? All of that is still being worked out. And so I can't honestly answer your questions about what the trigger is. I think you can safely assume that what has been triggered here is the activation. And the trigger for that has been this unlawful invasion again by Russia into Ukraine. Yeah, Cassie.
John, Secretary Stoltenberg also mentioned about providing defense article support and also including air defense systems to Ukraine. Is there going to be any input from the United States, any type of air defense systems like Patriots or advanced air defense systems?
What I would tell you is we're continuing to look for ways to support Ukraine to defend themselves. We have continued to do that, and we're going to look to do that going forward. And we're very actively engaged in those efforts to help them.
Right now, I'm going to tell you we have 63,928 troops actively deployed in Europe. 63,928 troops actively deployed within Europe. There are 26,800 Army, 7,564 Navy. The Marines, there's 12,073. United States Air Force, there's 28,229. And the Coast Guard, there are 62 deployed right now.
How much detail we put out there. But we know they have self-defense.
Those are the actual numbers as of right now.
And what's more is other nations are too. It's not just the United States. David.
Without detailing, can you say, are you continuing to ship defense equipment to Ukraine?
We have, let me put it this way, David. We're not talking about the effort to help them defend themselves. We have not talking about the effort to provide security assistance in a lethal and a non-lethal way in the past tense. I'd leave it at that. Janie. We're continuing to provide ways for them to defend themselves. That's as far as I'm going to go.
You're continuing to
We're
provide.
continuing to provide. We're continuing.
You're not just looking at ways to support. You are continuing to provide.
It's not. Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't trying to be funny. It's not past tense. It's not over. It's not done. We're continuing to look for ways to help them defend themselves. Janie.
Thank you, John. I have two questions on Russia and South Korea. First question, as you know, Russia has warned that it will retaliate immediately if there is a foreign state intervenes in Russia's moves. What is your comment? I follow up the second question.
What is my comment about? I'm sorry. Can you say it again?
Warned that it will retaliate immediately if there's a foreign state intervenes in Russia's moves.
Look, we're going to do everything that we need to do to defend our country. And as the president has said, we're going to do what we need to do to defend every inch of NATO territory. And we take those obligations seriously, both to the American people and to
These are active deployments that we're talking about right now. These are the active deployments in Europe, even though he doesn't know the numbers. These are active right now in Europe, even though he does not know the actual numbers of deployed troops in Europe by country. He doesn't know. What can we say? He just works for the Pentagon, and in charge of the biggest military in the world, but he doesn't know where they are.
South Korea joined sanctions along with the United States. That means
Well,
South Korea, you know that South Korea joined the sanctions with the
Yeah,
United
yeah.
States.
We
but
welcome that.
Russia warning that if South Korea doing this, they will not have.
We welcome the comments made by our South Korean allies. We welcome their willingness to impose sanctions on Russia, as so many other countries are doing. And I think the message is very clear that Mr. Putin continues to isolate himself and his people by these reckless and unlawful actions. And so you're seeing out of South Korea what you're seeing so many other places in the world, where countries are making very clear, very demonstrably so, their condemnation of this invasion of Ukraine. And again, we welcome the contributions to that effort by South Korea.
John, can I just ask a follow-up to David? Sorry. Would you say the United States is looking for ways to Ukraine, or is it that you are continuing to provide?
Guys, I'm not sure why this has become such a rhetorical exercise. We continue to provide for support for Ukraine to defend itself. The situation, right, is different in Ukraine than it was just a few days ago. So it would follow, I would think, that we're going, that we're going to have to look for other ways to do this. The airspace over Ukraine is contested. The Russians don't have superiority of it. It's contested. So we are going, I'll be very clear here.
It's contested airspace, but yet not a single fighter jet or Ukrainian helicopter has been in the air in the last 24 hours.
Being worked out. Does that help? Okay. Good. Dan.
Thank you. I was looking for a Pentagon reaction today to the back and forth. Finland came forward with some comments suggesting they may re-entertain.
Who did?
Finland.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Finland came forward raising the prospect of reorienting toward NATO a little bit more. Russia responded and basically made another veiled threat there. Do you anticipate from a Defense Department perspective any different kinds of conversations, any renewed discussions that would bring Finland under NATO at any point?
I'm not aware of any such discussions, Dan. Again, that would be for the alliance to speak to, not the United States. I would just say what we've said before in the case of Ukraine. Who a sovereign nation associates with, what alliances it joins, that's between that nation and the alliance. In this case, it would be between any country in NATO. And Mr. Putin doesn't get a veto over that. He doesn't get to decide unilaterally on his own what an independent sovereign state chooses to do with its association and the alliances that it wants to join. So I don't know of any renewed conversations with respect to Finland, but again, that would really be between Finland and for the alliance to speak to, not the United States.
Put another way, Ukraine was reorienting toward the West. They're paying dearly right now. Finland has raised similar prospects and are now also being threatened. Is there any straight line here that we should be addressing about threats on Finland and what that also would mean to Europe if there was a similar sort of operation on Finland?
Well, certainly that would be extremely destabilizing. We don't have any indication that that's necessarily in the offing in terms of actual conflict there. And so I don't want to speculate about the prospects of that or what we would do if that happened. I would just say that we are right now in a situation where obviously the security of Ukraine is being threatened, but European security writ large is being threatened. And you've seen the alliance step up in ways that truly are historic and significant. And I think you're going to continue to see that going forward. If the Secretary said it best, I mean, Mr. Putin is getting exactly what he says he didn't want, a strong NATO on his western flank. And so without speaking to Finland specifically, we, number one, stand up for sovereignty and the territorial integrity of independent nation states. That's not going to change. And Mr. Putin, should he want to violate that in new ways, will find new costs, I'm sure, imposed upon him. Number two, our commitment to NATO is ironclad, and we're going to continue to look for ways to strengthen that. Okay? Let me go to the phones here. Abraham?
Yeah, thanks so much for taking my call, John. Reports indicate that Kyiv could fall in as little as a day. Is the Defense Department doing anything to prevent Kyiv from falling? And then I have a second question.
I don't have a prediction about what's going to happen to Kyiv, Abraham. And as I said, we continue to provide ways for Ukraine to defend itself, both from a lethal and a non-lethal perspective. And the other thing I'd say to that is you can see for yourself, just an open press reporting, what your colleagues are reporting from the region, that Ukraine is fighting back. They are defending themselves. And as I said earlier to Jen, we certainly have seen indications that the Russians are not, in every case, making the progress that they thought they were going to make. What's your second question?
Yeah, thanks. On any assessments about what Ukrainian air defenses remain intact? Thank you.
I'm not going to get into a specific assessment about Ukrainian military capabilities. A, we don't have perfect visibility. B, even if we did, I don't think putting that out in the public when they're literally being attacked by a neighboring state is a smart move for us to make. Dimitri?
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. A couple of questions. The first is whether you have any updates on the amphibious landing assault near Mariupol. And secondly, some European intelligence officials say that actually half of Russia's combat power that had amassed along the border has now moved into Ukraine. I know in the US there was a view that a third had moved in. Have you seen big numbers move in today?
We have seen continued movement by Russian forces into Ukraine, both from the north and from the south. I can't give you, Dimitri, a percentage of what that looks like. I would just tell you that we don't believe that the majority of the combat power that Mr.
I do believe. Guess what? I know we have 44 special forces inside of Ukraine right now. 44. That's it. 44 special forces officers inside Ukraine, with 5 civilian contractors within Ukraine. For sure. Those numbers have been verified. I wanted to verify them before I said it, but 44. We have troops in Ukraine, technically. Special forces.
A blow by blow of exactly how many they've put ashore and what they're doing. But it certainly appears to us to be of a piece of their designs in the south to further cut off the Donbass region and to from a southern perspective continue to try to take population centers. Karun?
Hi, John. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me, John?
I got you.
Hi. Okay, sorry. I was going to take myself off mute. 2 questions. The first, just to clarify on the numbers thing. I know we were talking about the 7,000 that was announced yesterday, but of the 12,000 that you've kind of approximately that you've already been sending over to Europe, how many of those are supposed to be under the auspices of NATO and these new plans that would go forward? And then also, I understand you're not talking about where U.S. troops would be going because those defense plans are still being worked out, the details, but where do you see the potential flashpoints, maybe spillover points where NATO needs additional help right now as you're looking at that sphere of influence, whether or not that's specifically where U.S. troops end up going?
I wouldn't describe locations on the eastern flank of NATO as flashpoints right now. I mean, the Russian military is very much focused on Ukraine, and particularly the eastern half of the country. This is about reassuring allies and sending a strong message to Mr. Putin that we take our Article 5 commitments seriously. So I would not describe the eastern flank NATO territory as flashpoints, or having there be flashpoints on them. Most of the forces that we have either repositioned inside Europe or flowed from the United States, we've done on a unilateral basis. In fact, all of it we've done on a unilateral basis. What I said yesterday and what I tried to say today was, of the 7,000 that the president ordered yesterday, some of those will.
I gotta say, the 44 are with 5 contractors. That's listed as 5 people. Those 5 contractors could be a couple thousand people each. I do not know. I do not know the depth of that. I know there's 5 companies listed, and they list them as company groups. That's it. So if I have any more information about that, I will let you guys know as soon as possible. But 44 special forces and 5 contractors are in Ukraine from U.S.
To clarify, is that 7,000 as a separate silo from the 12,000 that are there that will stay unilateral, or are we kind of cross-counting numbers and pools of U.S. troops?
Talk with Megan. It's not binary. We have the secretary has shortened the tether on roughly 10 to 12,000. Some of those 10 to 12,000 are going to be earmarked for the NATO response force. Again, it's going to depend on what the capabilities are requested and what's the need, and then we'll go from there. Some of them he put on prepare to deploy orders or shortened tethers simply because he wanted them available for unilateral U.S. action. We have to work this out with NATO, and when we do, we'll have a better sense of who's going where and what they're going to be earmarked for. It is entirely possible, for instance, that units that are in Europe on unilateral orders, depending on what NATO needs, could be moved off of that and into the NATO command structure. Again, we're still working our way through that right now. So it's an unsatisfying answer, but it's an honest one. We simply don't know what that breakdown is going to be. Let's see. Tom Squitieri, Talk News.
Hi, John. Good afternoon. Thanks. I have 2 questions. My first one is, as well as you understand the Pentagon's view on this, does the NATO Readiness Force only apply to NATO nations, or could they go to places like Sweden, Finland, or Moldova?
These troops that we have provided and that we will continue to look at providing are earmarked for NATO territory. Paul McCleary, Politico.
Wait, John, I had 2 questions. My second one is, is the Pentagon considering pulling out the National Guard trainers that are now in Moldova?
I know of no such plans. Paul McCleary.
Hi, John. I'm on the line still waiting. If I could get my question.
Go ahead,
Tara. Thank you. How concerned is the building that this conflict could potentially spill over to the eastern flank countries? Putin has not been completely clear what his intent is and whether his intent maybe extends beyond Ukraine. I'm just wondering if in any of the conversations with counterparts with Russia, have they clearly communicated that their intent stops at Ukraine?
It is, you said it actually in your question, it's not entirely clear if Mr. Putin has designs beyond Ukraine. And it's because that's not perfectly clear that we continue to look for ways to bolster our NATO capabilities and to reassure our allies. I mean, one of the reasons
if NATO joins this war, World War III has started and we are officially in it. Wendy, if that's what you want to know. NATO is us. We are NATO. We are one.
I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead.
War. John, just one follow-up. Is there any concern that this could grow into a regional war?
I think there's no reason for it to be a war now, Tara, and it shouldn't have been. Mr. Putin had diplomatic options on the table that he decided to ignore and to invade Ukraine regardless. So there should be no reason why there's a war now. There is obviously one. Clearly, that's evident. We need to make sure, and we will make sure, that it's very clear that we're going to defend every inch of NATO territory. I'm not going to speculate about what the future holds because it is not perfectly clear where Mr. Putin is going here. We want to make it clear that he will not be able to threaten in any tangible way our NATO allies. Okay, Paul, let's try it again.
All right, third time's a charm. Thanks. You said we're going to continue to supply defensive weapons to Ukraine. Is there any consideration of training Ukrainian troops outside of the country for them to then go back in and fight?
I think we're looking at all kinds of different ways to continue supporting Ukrainian armed forces, and we're not taking anything off the table with respect to how that might manifest itself going forward, and that could include some training.
John?
Yeah.
So you've addressed the issue of supporting the Ukrainian forces several times now, looking into different ways, which would.
We are looking into different ways to support Ukrainian forces.
Ukrainian forces
not like we have contractors
resist
there
for a
already.
long time. Is that the assessment? To be able actually to get that assistance in various ways, in lethal and non-lethal.
I'm not going to put a timestamp on this, Fadi. I mean, but you can see for yourselves that the Ukrainians are fighting back. They're defending their country.
So you don't think that the time is running in a way that it might be too late to provide any type of assistance?
We have been providing assistance for quite some time. We're going to continue to provide assistance, and they're fighting back. They're fighting back in many ways using the assistance that the United States has provided, as well as other nations.
So they're using the assistance.
You can see it for yourself. I'm not going to tell you what weapon systems they're firing on what day and in what location. I don't have that level of fidelity. But you don't need me to tell you that. You can see it for yourself in the imagery. They're fighting back. Yeah. I think that's it for today. Thanks very much. Have a good weekend.
I think that's it before I get myself in trouble and say more information that I'm not supposed to be talking about anyways, as we see what's happening in Ukraine, this is the border right here outside of Ukraine as people are leaving Ukraine. This is a troubling scene because this is what's happening. Say it, but
my brother.
these people out here are just trying to get out of the country. We have troops there. I don't know why we deny or try to deny how many troops we even have in Europe at this point. I mean, when the numbers are public of what troops we have in which countries in Europe at any given time, why would he play the game of, oh, I don't know. This. Of course, the numbers in Ukraine have not been listed publicly. And Putin said he had plans beyond Ukraine. He plans on taking the SSR back, which means 2 other countries will be taken, and they're north of the Ukraine that they're taking right now. But Belarus, of course, is a free country. It is not a part of Ukraine or part of Russia, but it still follows Russian orders. So we will see what's happened and see what's going to happen next. Amongst everything that's been happening out there, people being, of course, war-torn nation, it is sad to see. But we're being honest about what's happening. We're giving you honest numbers. And 63,000 troops may not sound like a lot. Almost 64,000 deployed within Europe. So that's a pretty good number. Be deployed within Europe. We continue coverage of everything going on today. Putin has already threatened with nukes. Yes, exactly. And it's very sad watching these people, of course, coming across the border with nothing. Closing their back. There's been reports that local government has been handing out weapons to citizens that are staying. They're sending their wives and children, of course, and staying back to fight for their country. To people that do want to fight for Ukraine on the western side. So very good it will do because none of them have been. Why do you think he wanted Chernobyl? Wendy, he took Chernobyl to stop Ukraine from using it as dirty weapons. Ukraine has done it before back used the nuclear fallout or nuclear waste and put it on other bombs to make dirty weapons before, Wendy. That's the reason he took it so quickly, strategically today. Yeah, it's going to get worse before it gets better here tonight. I will be back probably in about, I'm going to sign off here, and I will be back about 5 now, so 6, 7, 8. Let's say 9 o'clock p.m. I will be back live, giving you an update on the truckers and everything going on in Ukraine. Of course, as it's happening. Any donations are extremely appreciated. We haven't received any here in a couple days, but any donations are appreciated, but not needed. I want to thank you guys for being with us. Like I said, we will be back live around 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so about 4 hours. God bless you guys.